Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me today. We're going to go ahead and go over Wittgenstein's philosophical investigations. To start with, I did want to go over what an elliptical sentence was. All I could find was ellipsis linguistics. In linguistics, ellipsis or an elliptical construction is the omission from a clause of one or more words that are nevertheless understood in the context of the remaining elements. Wittgenstein had used this phrase, and I wasn't sure what it meant. And basically, that's what it is. It's a sentence where words are removed, but you understand what words are removed based on the context. So it gives one example of this as gapping. John can play the guitar, and Mary the violin. So you remove can play, but it's understood what we're saying here. Can play is understood from the context, so it's being removed. So that's what an elliptical sentence would be then. Let's go ahead and hop back in and start right where we left off. But now it looks as if when someone says, "Bring me a slab," he could mean this expression as one long word corresponding to the single word, slab, and that's supposed to be a exclamation mark there, I'm pretty sure. Then can one mean it sometimes as one word and sometimes as four? And how does one usually mean it? I think we should be inclined to say we mean the sentence, words, the sentence, that's something, have some glitch here, words when we use it in contrast with other sentences such as hand me a slab, bring him a slab, bring two slabs, etc. That is, in contrast with sentences containing the separate words of our command in other combinations. But what does using one sentence in contrast with others consist in? I am having trouble talking today. Do the others perhaps hover before one's mind? So what are we getting at here? But what does using one sentence in contrast with others consist in? Do the others perhaps hover before one's mind? All of them? And while one is saying the one sentence, or before, or afterwards? No. Even if such an explanation rather tempts us, we need only think for a moment of what actually happens in order to see that we are going astray here. We say that we use the command in contrast with other sentences because our language contains the possibility of those other sentences. Someone who did not understand our language, a foreigner, who had fairly often heard someone giving the order, "Bring me a slab," might believe that this whole series of sounds was one word corresponding perhaps to the word for building stone in his language. If he himself had then given this order, perhaps he would have pronounced it differently, and we should say he pronounces it so oddly because he takes it for a single word. But then, is there not also something different going on in him when he pronounces it, something corresponding to the fact that he conceives the sentence as a single word? Either the same thing may go on in him or something different. For what goes on in you when you give such an order? Are you conscious of it consisting of four words while you are uttering it? Of course, you have mastery of this language, which contains those other sentences as well. But is this having a mastery something that happens while you are uttering the sentence? And I admitted that the foreigner will probably pronounce a sentence differently if he conceives it differently. But what we call his wrong conception need not lie in anything that accompanies the utterance of the command. I confess, this paragraph is a little dense to me. What are we quite saying here? So, bring me a slab, how do we know that that's four words rather than one? Is that all that we're getting at here? Because, there are some languages, I think, that sort of smash words together to make new words. Foreigner. Yeah, okay. So a foreigner may not understand, hearing the phrase, may not understand if it is one word or four. Okay. I think I understand what they're getting at there. The sentence is elliptical, not because it leaves something out that something we think when we utter it, but because it is shortened in comparison with a particular paradigm of our grammar. Of course, one might object here. You grant that the shortened and unshortened sentence have the same sense. I just want to make sure of something rather quickly. Yes, good, okay. Wanted to make sure I wasn't doing a rather strange thing of reading this in the wrong order. The sentence is elliptical not because it leaves something out that we think when we utter it, but because it is shortened in comparison with a particular paradigm of our grammar. Of course, one might object here. You grant that the shortened and the unshortened sentence have the same sense. What is this sense, then? Isn't there a verbal expression for this sense? Doesn't the fact that the sentences have the same sense consist in having the same use? In Russia, one says stone red instead of the stone is red. Do they feel the copula to be missing in this sense, or attach it in thought? Imagine a language game in which A asks and B reports the number of slabs or blocks in a pile, or the colors and shapes of the building stones that are stacked in such and such place. Such a report might run 5 slabs. Now what is the difference between the report or statement, 5 slabs, and the order, 5 slabs? Well, it is the part which uttering those words plays in the language game. No doubt the tone of voice and the look with which they are uttered, and much else beside, will also be different. But we could also imagine the tones being the same, for an order and a report can be spoken in a variety of tones of voice and with various expressions of face, the difference being only in the application. Of course, we might use the words statement and command to stand for grammatical forms of sentence and intonations. We do in fact call "Isn't the weather glorious today?" a question, although it is used as a statement. We could imagine a language in which all statements had the form and tone of rhetorical questions, or every command the form of the question, "Would you like to?" Perhaps it will be said, when he says what he says has the form of a question, but is really a command. That is, has the function of a command in the technique of using the language. Similarly, one says, "You will do this," not as a prophecy, but as a command. What makes it one or the other? And I've thought about this to some degree. Commands are really interesting, right? Just kind of conceptually. When you tell someone, pick that up, put that over there, clean your room, whatever. I suppose if you're, I don't know how many parents we have listening, so I don't know when the last time any of you told someone to clean the room, but conceivably that's something that someone could tell someone to do. But what's going on there? What is a command? Well, all commands to me seem to, and I'm not sold on this, but all commands seem to be resolvable down to either requests or threats to me. Typically a command has it's not necessarily stated, but it has the assumed effect that something bad will happen if you don't follow it. So, for example, if you're at work and your boss gives you a command, your boss can say, "Go stack these boxes in the corner." What the boss isn't saying is the rest of the sentence, which is, "or else you will be written up," or something to that effect. And if your boss wasn't going to do that, if there were literally no negative consequences, well then, what's your boss do? And your boss can tell you, "Go stack those boxes in the corner," but if literally nothing happens, then what's really being happened? What is he's at best he's making a request. Well, what's a request? Well, a request is a statement of desire, isn't it? It's a statement of, well, I think it's a statement of desire. There could be more going on with requests. It at least involves a statement of desire, but I think there's a difference between saying, "I want a cheeseburger," and "Can I please have a cheeseburger?" The difference between a request and a simple statement of desire isn't clear to me. Maybe expectations comes with requests, but even then I'm not 100% sold on that. I feel like there are requests made without expectation. I don't know, it's an interesting question, but we're sort of getting into the meat of this, sort of what's going on structurally with language. Frege's idea that every assertion contains an assumption, which is the thing that is asserted, really rests on the possibility found in our language of writing every statement in the form, "It is asserted that," It is asserted that such and such is the case, but that such and such is the case is not a sentence in our language. So far it is not a move in the language game. And if I write not "it is asserted," but "it is asserted, such and such is the case," the words "it is asserted" simply become superfluous. We might very well also write every statement in the form of a question, followed by a yes. For instance, "Is it raining?" Yes. Would this show that every statement contained a question? Of course, we have the right to use an assertion sign in contrast with a question mark, for example, or if we want to distinguish an assertion from a fiction or a supposition. It is only a mistake if one thinks that the assertion consists of two actions, entertaining and asserting, assigning the truth value or something of the kind, and that performing these actions we follow the propositional sign roughly as we sing from the musical score. Reading the written sentences loud or soft is indeed comparable with singing from a musical score, but thinking the sentence that is read is not. Not 100% sure what assertion sign is there. I'm not sure if an assertion sign is a punctuation mark, like an exclamation mark. I'll have to look that up. Frege's assertion sign marks the beginning of the sentence. Thus, it might just be something that Frege came up with that I'll need to look up. Thus, its function is like that of the full stop. It distinguishes the whole period from a clause within the period. If I hear someone say, "It's raining," but do not know whether I have heard the beginning and end of the period, so far the sentence does not serve to tell me anything. If I hear someone say, "It's raining," and do not know whether I have heard the beginning and end of the period, so far this sentence does not serve to tell me anything. I think what's being said here is all of you hear is "it's raining." It could be a question. Is it raining? It could be a different kind of sentence, such as we'll leave when it's raining, although I don't know why you would say that. Something of that form. Or "it's raining outside" could be a statement as well. Different forms. So I think that's what we're getting at here, is that absent punctuation, when you're just hearing a sentence, you're not getting its full context and meaning yet. I think that's what we're getting at here. But how many kinds of sentence are there? Say assertion, question, and command. There are countless kinds, countless different kinds of what we call symbols, words, sentences. And this multiplicity is not something fixed, given once for all, but new types of language, new language games, as we may say, come into existence, and others become obsolete and get forgotten. We can get a rough picture of this from the changes in mathematics. I also think of memes. That might sound strange, but there is a kind of language to memes. Like, a lot of memes, you sort of understand them in part because of the history of the image, and images get changed over time, and they get repopularized and reused, and they make resurgence. There's a kind of language there. I don't know if Wittgenstein would agree with me there, but I think certainly we're sort of still developing our language in sort of interesting new ways, and sort of extra linguistic ways, maybe. Although, whether or not, what's language, right? Are memes language? Here the term language game is meant to bring into prominence the fact that the speaking of language is part of an activity or a form of life. Review the multiplicity of language games in the following examples and in others: giving orders and obeying them, describing the appearance of an object or giving its measurements, constructing an object from a drawing, reporting an event, speculating about an event. Indeed, there's an interesting question. And credit to a friend of mine from college for first introducing me to this phrase. We were in an advanced logic course, and we had to write a paper about whether the author of the textbook we were reading was taller than Bilbo Baggins, who was the Hobbit, of course, is supposed to be quite short. And all of us, there were 3 of us in the class, and we all took different approaches. My friend's approach, actually I'm friends with both of them, but the friend I'm thinking of, his approach was to say functionally that I know what I mean when I say that the author of our textbook, Graham Priest, is taller than Bilbo Baggins. And he really relied on that phrase, "I know what I mean when I say," which is a really useful phrase, actually. Humans' ability to intuit language like that is pretty incredible, and it accounts for, I think, a lot of our ability to talk. So, for example, suppose you were to tell someone, suppose you were to put a variety of shapes into a box, and you took the cube out, and you made like a nick along one edge or one of the corners of the cube, which means that technically, mathematically, it is no longer a cube, right? Like, it doesn't fit the technical mathematical definition of the cube. Small nick, but technically, if you were being picky, it's not a cube anymore. You put it back in the box. You walk away and you tell to someone else, "Go grab the cube out of that box." They walk over there. They're going to do the thing that you wanted them to do. Now, technically, it would be, very few people are going to go over and say there's no cube in this box, because they know what you meant. And that ability to know what you mean is an incredibly powerful human trait, which is going to be involved in how language works. And what Wittgenstein is doing here is he's sort of analyzing language and breaking down all the different sort of components of language that do look quite different from one another. Consider, I think he mentions swearing at one point, for example. So suppose you, I think that he mentions that later on. Not 100% sure about that, but suppose you hit your thumb with a hammer and you shout, "Damn it!" Well, Christian soteriology and like isn't really, it's not really what you're describing. You're not describing like damnation and like going to hell, and like you're not describing theology. What's happening is you're signaling pain and distress and anger. A lot of swear words are like this. They don't actually mean what they mean. They're used for emphasis. So you can add like a swear word to a sentence just for emphasis. But it doesn't. It sort of breaks. It isn't a noun exactly. It's sort of its own thing. So it's important to remember that in language, we don't, as he pushed back against Augustine's conception earlier, we don't just have nouns in language. We have all kinds of stuff going on. Imagine a picture representing a boxer in a particular stance. Now, this picture can be used to tell someone how he should stand, should hold himself, and how he should not hold himself, or how a particular man did stand in such and such a place, and so on. One might, using the language of chemistry, call this picture a propositional radical. This is how Frege thought of the assumption. Interesting. I think something may be funny happening. Let's see, forming and testing hypothesis, maybe, because this seems connected with. I wonder if there's were footnotes that were sort of jumbled up at some point. Huh, oh well. So more things that we can do in language. Forming and testing a hypothesis, presenting the results of an experiment in tables and paradigms, making up a story and reading it, play acting, singing catches, guessing riddles, making a joke, telling it, solving a problem in practical arithmetic, translating from one language to another, asking, thanking, cursing, greeting, praying. It is interesting to compare the multiplicity of tools in language and the ways they're used, the multiplicity of kinds of words and sentence, with what logicians have said about the structure of language, including the author of the Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus, which Wittgenstein wrote that. So is that a typical thing to refer to yourself like that in third person? If you do not keep the multiplicity of language games in view, you will perhaps be inclined to ask questions like, what is a question? Is it the statement that I do not know such and such, or the statement that I wish the other person would tell me? Or is it the description of my mental state of uncertainty? And is the cry help such a description? Think of how many different kinds of things are called description. Description of a body's position means it by means of its coordinates. Description of a facial expression. Description of a sensation of a mood, of a touch, of a mood. Of course, it is possible to substitute the form of a statement or description for the usual form of question. I want to know whether. I am in doubt whether. But this does not bring the different language games any closer together. The significance of such possibilities of transformation, for example, of turning all statements into sentences beginning I think or I believe, and thus, as it were, in descriptions of my inner life, will become clear in another place. Solipsism. The significance of transformation, for example, of turning all statements. Okay. It is sometimes said that animals do not talk because they lack the mental capacity, and this means that they do not think, and that is why they do not talk. But they simply do not talk, or to put it better, they do not use language, if we accept the most primitive forms of language. Commanding, questioning, recounting, chatting are as much part of our natural history as walking, eating, drinking, and playing. I wonder to what degree modern scientists would agree with this, to what degree they would say how different their language, like animal language, is from ours. I don't know. I'm curious. One thinks that learning language games consists in giving names to objects, viz. To human beings, to shapes, to colors, to pains, to moods, to numbers, etc. To repeat, naming is something like attaching a label to a thing. One can say that this is preparatory to the use of a word. But what is it a preparation of? I'm assuming another glitch there. We name things and then we can talk about them, can refer to them and talk, as if what we did next were given with the mere act of naming, as if there were only one thing called talking about a thing, whereas in fact we do the most various things with our sentences. Think of exclamations alone with their completely different functions. Water! Away! Ow! Help! Fine! No! Are you inclined still to call these words names of objects? And so, for example, in the first one, you say water. Well, water's a noun, but in this context, like, imagine the man in the desert as he crawls towards the oasis. Water! Well, he's not just saying the noun. He's saying, I need it. I want it. Please give it to me. I'm desperate for it. These kinds of things. So he isn't just saying the noun. Our language lets us do things like that. That you can't encapsulate it perfectly. I believe that's what Wittgenstein's getting at. I'm always going to say I believe because Wittgenstein's complicated, and there's always the potential that I'm getting basically all of this wrong. So, I'm hedging my bets. In languages, example 2 and 8, there was no such thing as asking something's name. That is, with its correlate, ostensive definition is, we might say, a language game on its own. That is really to say, we are brought up trained to ask, what is that called, upon which the name is given? And there's also a language game of inventing a name for something, and hence of saying, this is blank, and then using the new name. Thus, for example, children give names to their dolls, and then talk about them and to them. Think in connection how singular is the use of a person's name to call him. So, for example, if you just shout, any particular name, Samuel! Well, what's happening? You're not just saying the noun. You're not just saying Samuel out of nowhere. You're calling them, but you're doing it. You're not saying, come here, Samuel. You're just saying, Samuel! But it's understood in the context of the language game that it's a summons, as it were. And that's obviously tone of voice can communicate that to some degree. And very interesting stuff. Now, one can ostensively define a proper name, the name of a color, the name of a material, a numeral, the name of a point of the compass, and so on. The definition of the number 2, that is called 2, pointing to 2 nuts, is perfectly exact. But how can 2 be defined like that? Numbers are going to be very tricky. The person one gives the definition to doesn't know what he wants to call 2. He will suppose that 2 is the name given to this group of nuts. He may suppose this, but perhaps he does not. He might make the opposite mistake. When I want to assign a name to this group of nuts, he might understand it as a numeral, and he might equally well take the name of a person, of which I give an ostensive definition. Remember, ostensive definition, I believe, if I remember correctly, is just pointing at things and saying that, like, it's like you point at the thing and you say what it is. I believe that's what he mentioned ostensive definition as. Is that of a color or of a race or even of a point of the compass. That is to say, an ostensive definition can be variously interpreted in every case. Let me check up on what he meant by ostensive definition, because it's just a few pages up above. Alright, almost there. Ostensive definition. I just want to make sure. Here we go. Ostensive definition. I'll call it ostensive teaching of words. This ostensive teaching of words. Well, what's an ostensive definition then? Hold on. Ostensive, direct or clearly demonstrative. Ostensive definition. Oh, thank you, Wikipedia. An ostensive definition conveys the meaning of a term by pointing out examples. This type of definition is often used when the term is difficult to define verbally, either because the words will not be understood, as with children and new speakers of the language. Okay, so it is just kind of like, and for this is a definition by pointing. Oh, okay, all right, got it. Good. All right. Perhaps you can say, indeed, how would you ostensibly define 2? How would you just point to 2? You'd have to point to a bunch of stuff that came in 2s and hope that someone got it eventually, I suppose. Without sort of repeated examples of like multiple things, it'd be difficult. Clearly children, in fact, do learn this, but that's interesting. How could you ostensively define a number? Perhaps you say 2 can only be ostensibly defined in this way. This number is called 2. For the word number here shows what place in language and grammar we assign to the word. But this means that the word number must be explained before the ostensive definition can be understood. The word number in the definition does indeed show this place, does show the post at which we station the word. And we can prevent misunderstandings by saying, this color is called so-and-so, this length is called so-and-so, and so on. That is to say, misunderstandings are sometimes averted in this way. But is there only one way of taking the word color or length? Well, they just need defining. Defining then by means of other words. And what about the last definition in this chain? Do not say there isn't a last definition. This is just as if you chose to say there isn't a last house on this road. One can always build an additional one. So I thought a lot about this, about the like the concept of like bottom, like the bottom of language, as it were. Because you can say, okay, so define large. Well, large means big. Well, what's big? It means with respect to size, there's a lot of it. Well, what's size? Well, it's mass. And you can keep doing this. Eventually the chain, there has to be something where it's just like we just accept what this word is because we have an intuitive sense of it or something like that. I mean, if someone has an explanation for how language could be eternally cyclical and like self-referential and it still works, I'd like to hear it, but it doesn't, I don't think that makes sense. It seems to me at the moment there seems to be some foundational words that sort of aren't like further defined by other words. Okay, I'm going to call it there. Like I said last time, Wittgenstein is rather dense, so we're getting more into the meat of this discussion. We're developing our sense of what language is and how it works. We're going to keep reading through this. Once again, thank you so much for listening along with me today. If you wouldn't mind giving the channel a subscribe and giving the video a like, that would really help me out. Thank you so very much.